this is Jyoti and welcome to Biology classes. So in this initiative, I will be bringing you the biology portion of your class 10th NCERT science curriculum. So as you see in my thumbnail, I will be starting with the very first chapter, that is your life processes, which will be your chapter number 6 in the NCERT curriculum. So let's begin with our first class. So let's start with a very basic thing, like in our daily life, we consume various foods which are a source of carbohydrate, which are the source of proteins, vitamins, minerals, and so on. So the basic question is, why we are taking these foods? Definitely the answer would be for our survival and for getting energy. However, the same as like it is, if I would be asking, what are life processes? So the life processes are also the basic functions performed by the living organisms to maintain their survival in this earth is what we call as life processes. However, in the next question, if I would ask that what are the criteria to decide whether something is alive or not? So you might be answering that it is the ability to reproduce and it is the ability of someone to adapt to some particular situations or environment, or you can say the breathing, that is inhalation and exhalation. However, the most important criteria to decide whether something is alive or not is what we called as movement. However, as we can see that there are distinct differences between what we see and what we cannot see. Some things are observable, whereas some things we cannot observe. So the things which we cannot observe during the movement is our cellular and the molecular movements, which takes us to the cellular organization of the human or the living organisms, in which the cells will give rise to tissues, the tissues will give rise to organs, and these organs will give rise to organ system, and later it will take you on to the complete living organism. So moving on. So the main topic from your chapter is the life processes, and it will comprise of your nutrition, which is the process of taking the food. That means ingesting the food and utilizing it for our body, for our growth, for our development, etc., which we called as the life processes. Then comes respiration. The respiration is the process by which the food is burned in the cells of the body with the help of oxygen to release the adenosine triphosphate, which we in short called as ATP. Then we will be moving on to transportation. It is the process by which the food, oxygen, water and the waste products are carried from one part of our body to the another part of the body. Then at last we will be moving on to excretion. That means the process by which the waste products are removed from our body. So moving on, starting with this, that is the first part, which is your nutrition. So as I have already stated that nutrition is the process by which the living organism takes up the food and utilizes it for various bodily functions, and these functions are mainly to get the energy. And if I say that what are the modes of nutrition, so the modes of nutrition will be your autotrophic nutrition and your heterotrophic nutrition. So in the autotrophic nutrition, as we know that these organisms are capable of making their own food by your simple inorganic substances like carbon dioxide, water, also in the presence of sunlight and in the chlorophyll. So if we consider the examples of this autotrophic nutrition, here it is all green plants that contains the chlorophyll and again some bacteria. So in bacteria we can consider the cyanobacteria as the most prominent example of autotrophic nutrition. However, in heterotrophic nutrition, these are the organisms that are dependent on the foods directly or indirectly within the plants. So, some examples are your all animals, fungi, and even some bacteria. So, moving upon, so here we have the types of nutrition, in which we have the first as your parasitic nutrition. So these parasitic organisms are those organisms which obtain their food from either living inside or outside the body of a particular organism, which we also call them as host. Now, for example, we have the most prominent example that we have been learning from class 7th. It's your Kaskata, or we can say the local name as Amarbel. That means this particular plant lacks the chlorophyll. So it cannot simply do the process of photosynthesis. That's why it is dependent upon the particular plant upon which it gets the shelter. And that particular plant which gives the shelter to Kaskata or Amarbel is what we can call as host. However, the other examples are your lice, ticks, and even roundworms, etc. And the second is your saprophytic nutrition. So these saprophytic nutrition organisms are those organisms which are dependent upon the dead and the decaying matter, and from them they gain their energy for their survival. And the most common examples are a mushroom, then bread mold, yeast, etc. And the third one is your holozoic nutrition. So holozoic nutrition organisms are those organisms which ingest the food, and it goes through three simple processes. That is your number one, ingestion. Ingestion simply means the process through which we living organisms takes up the food, and then it moves upon to the process of digestion, in which the food that we have intaken is broken down into simple substances. And the last one is your egestion. As I have written here is a note that egestion is the biological process of expelling the undigested food. Just remember the term. You have to remember this undigested food. So egestion is the process, biological process, in which the undigested food are removed from our bodies. Okay, let's moving upon to the autotrophic nutrition in plants. So as we can see, the first thing we have to study in the autotrophic nutrition in plant is the photosynthesis. And many of us are learning or studying from the very first beginning, from class 5th itself, that photosynthesis is the process through which the green plants makes their own food with the help of carbon dioxide and water by using your sunlight energy and also in the presence of chlorophyll. However, if we try to look this in a broader term, we can say like this it as, let's consider it is a plant or a tree, whereas in the soil, where in the soil adequate amount of water plus your nutrient is available. However, this H2O, that means your water plus nutrients, are then transported into your leaves, through the xylem. And whenever this soil plus in the soil, water and nutrition through xylem moves upon to the leaves, there are small pores. That means the small holes we can see present on the surface of the leaves, which we named as stomata. So these stomata are the small pores which are responsible for the exchange of gases. That means they will allow the intake of carbon dioxide, and they will allow the release of oxygen into the atmosphere. Now, one more thing that is present on the surface of the leaves is the chlorophyll, which we know as the green pigment present on the surface of the leaves. Now, in this complete scenario, we can say that that particular leaf is now full with water plus nutrient. Along with it, the carbon dioxide that is required for the food making process, and chlorophyll is also there to trap the sunlight. However, the final and the utmost necessary thing for this process to happen is your sunlight energy. Sunlight energy. So, this sunlight energy is being trapped by the chlorophyll to perform the whole function of photosynthesis. So, in this, we can see that through this equation of both we have the word equation as well as a symbol equation, that the carbon dioxide plus water in presence of light and chlorophyll will give me the first product of photosynthesis, that is glucose, and with the byproduct of oxygen. Okay, now let's move on to the another topic, that is the process of photosynthesis. As I have made you understood the process of photosynthesis, that it is a food making process by the plants by using carbon dioxide and water, and also stomata helps in the the exchange of gases between the atmosphere and the plant leaves. However, there is also a green pigment present known as chlorophyll, which helps in the trapping of sunlight. And then, as I have already mentioned, that the first product that we get during the process of photosynthesis is your carbohydrate called as your glucose. So moving upon, one more thing that we need to learn about this in a particular chapter of this is that the stomata. So as I have mentioned that these stomata are the tiny small pores present on the surface of the leaves, through which the exchange of the gases mainly takes place. However, if we look at one particular stoma, it consists of the guard cells. That means these guard cells are mainly responsible for your opening and the closing of the stomatal pore. So the question may arise that you may be asked to write the function of the guard cells in your exams. So during this you have to say that, so this guard cells mainly regulates the opening and the closing of the stomatal pore. However, there are two conditions. Number one is that whenever the water enters into the guard cells, as you can see in the first part, the cell, that means the stomatal pore, is getting swelling up. So after it gets swells up, the stomatal pore also gets open. However, if the particular plant is losing, or the particular leaf is in the scenario of losing the water, so the guard cell will again remain in the shrink position, and in that scenario we can see the stomatal pore as in a closed position. Another important feature you need to learn is during this sunny day or in the morning day, you can see that the guard cells are open, whereas in the night time the stoma is closed. So why it is? We can simply draw the one conclusion from this, that during the morning, since the process of photosynthesis is taking place, that means it is the adequate amount of water is being going inside the guard cells, and that's why it is regulating the opening of the stomatal pore. And during the night time, since the complete process of photosynthesis cannot take place, that's why the stomatal pore remains closed. I hope you are getting it, understand? So let's start the next part of our chapter, that is the nutrition in animals. As we can see, in the nutrition of animals, we will be learning about the nutrition in amoeba, which is a unicellular organism, and again in the multicellular organism, we will be studying about the nutrition in human digestive system. So let's start with the nutrition in amoeba. So as I have written, amoeba is a unicellular animal primarily living in water. So before starting this chapter, means starting this topic, you have to go through this, that means this diagram where the complete step of the digestion of the, that means the nutrition of amoeba is shown. That is in the very first process, that is your ingestion. So ingestion simply means, as I have already stated, that it is the process through which the living organism takes up the food. So in the same way, during the ingestion process, the amoeba ingests the food by a finger-like projections, which we called as pseudopodia. Got it? So the finger-like projections of this amoeba are called as your pseudopodia, through which it can ingest the food. Okay. So whenever a food particle, as you can see, whenever the food particle approaches towards the amoeba, it makes an finger-like extension in its body. And at the same time, the amoeba also creates a food vacuole in its body itself for storing that particular food. So now let us begin with the second part, that is your digestion. So you know that in our cell a jelly-like substance is present, which is called as your cytoplasm. And definitely we know about the cytoplasm. We have read it in our earlier classes. So from these cytoplasm, several enzymes comes to or enters into the food vacuole, and it breaks down this food particles into your simple soluble molecules. Just remember the term that I have said, it is your simple soluble molecules. That means, as I have already stated, the main purpose of digestion is to break down of the food into your smaller ones. Got it? So with this we complete the process of digestion, and then the third step is your absorption. So what happens in absorption is that these simple soluble molecules are then absorbed from the food vacuole of the amoeba by a process which we call as diffusion. So the definition of diffusion, I think I must not say it again, as you have already stated that it is the movement of the solute from the higher concentration to the lower concentration. So likewise, these simple soluble molecules are absorbed by the amoeba from the food vacuole of it by a process called diffusion. So with this, let us move on to the fourth part, that is the process of assimilation. So during the process of assimilation, the cells of the amoeba obtain their energy from the food particle that is already absorbed, and by this process which we called as your respiration. That means through the process of respiration, the assimilation of the food particles or the absorbed particles takes place in the amoeba. Now this energy, they utilizes it for their growth and to repair the damaged part of your body and so on. And lastly, the fifth point we have is your egestion. As I have already stated, the egestion means the removal of the undigested part. So whenever a large amount of undigested foods are collected in the cell membrane or inside the amoeba, inside the amoeba, this cell membrane initially ruptures it, and the undigested foods are thrown away from its particular body. And during this process, we can say that the nutrition of amoeba is completed. So either you have to go through this diagram, or you can also draw this diagram during your examination. So with this, I hope you are understanding what I taught till now. So in the next part, we will be moving with the nutrition in human beings. So I would like to conclude here with the first portion of your class, that is up to the nutrition in amoeba. So until then, I would like to thank you everyone for watching this video, and keep subscribing our channel.